Hey guys, let's start with a picture. It's night. Not the cozy kind of night with warm lights and humming fridges. This is medieval night. The moon is thin. The stars feel close. And the cold is already waiting outside your door like it paid rent. In the Middle Ages, winter was not a season. It was a test. It was a boss fight. It was nature saying, "All right, human. Let's see what you've got." People today complain when their heater takes 3 minutes to warm up. Medieval villagers had no heater. No insulation. No weather app that said, "Light snow expected." Their forecast was basically, look at the sky, feel your knees, and hope you're wrong. Cold wasn't just uncomfortable. It was dangerous. It could steal your sleep, your strength, your animals, your crops, and sometimes your life. Winter was not a vibe. It was a threat with teeth. Imagine waking up and seeing your breath float in front of your face inside your own house. That was normal. Your walls were thin. Your windows were tiny holes covered with cloth or animal skin. Wind slipped in like it was invited. And once cold entered, it stayed. It sat in corners. It crawled under beds. It hugged your bones. Villagers didn't say, "It's a bit chilly." They said winter had arrived. Like a guest. A heavy, silent guest who eats your food and makes your fingers hurt. They respected winter like it was alive. Not in a cute way. In a careful, fearful way. Winter was talked about almost like a creature. Something that could punish you if you were lazy. Or bless you if you were prepared. If you didn't stack enough wood, winter would notice. If your roof had a hole, winter would find it. If your grain storage was weak, winter would take a bite. And winter always won arguments. Cold shaped everything. It shaped what people feared. It shaped what they prayed for. It shaped how they worked, how they slept, how they moved, how they told stories. It even shaped how close families sat together at night. Because heat was human. And cold was the dark side of nature. In winter, work didn't stop. But it changed. Fields went quiet. The soil slept under frost. No green rose. No buzzing insects. Just white, gray, and brown. Animals were kept close. Chickens huddled. Cows breathed steam into the air like tiny dragons. Every animal was food, heat, and money, so losing one to cold felt personal. People woke up slower. They moved carefully. A bad slip on ice could mean a broken bone. And a broken bone in winter could mean, well, not a great ending. Religion got louder in winter. Church bells felt heavier. Prayers got longer. Candles became more important than ever. Villagers prayed for protection, for warm fires, for animals to live, for grain to last, for children not to get sick. Winter made people look up more often. Because when the world feels frozen, you ask someone bigger than you for help. Even stories changed. Around the fire, people told tales of spirits in the snow. Of shadows in forests. Of wolves with eyes like lanterns. Of winter beings that watched villages from the dark. These weren't just spooky fun. They were ways to explain fear. Ways to teach children not to wander too far. Ways to remind everyone, winter is not your friend. And the nights were long. Really long. The sun rose late and left early. Darkness stretched like a blanket that forgot to stop. After sunset, the world didn't just get quiet. It disappeared. No streetlights. No glowing windows down the road. Just small fire glows in tiny homes, scattered like shy stars on the ground. Silence ruled. Snow softened sound. Wind whispered. Footsteps felt loud. A single barking dog could carry across the village. Every noise mattered. Every shadow looked suspicious. Your ears worked overtime. Inside the house, families gathered close. Not for fun. For survival. Body heat mattered. Sharing space mattered. You could tell how cold it was by how tightly everyone sat together. Winter turned homes into small human nests. And when the fire went low, everyone noticed. Fire was life. Fire was food. Fire was light. Fire was the difference between comfort and pain. If your fire died at night, you didn't just wake up cold. You woke up afraid. Because winter does not forgive empty fireplaces. Even sleep felt different. You slept in layers. Clothes. Blankets. Sometimes with animals nearby. You tucked your feet into sacks. You prayed before closing your eyes. Because tomorrow was never guaranteed, especially when cold ruled the land. This wasn't dramatic thinking. This was logic. Winter could take a weak baby. Winter could take an old grandparent. Winter could take your stored food with mold and damp. Winter could take your roof in a storm. So villagers treated winter with respect. Not love. Not hate. Respect. They prepared for it months ahead. They whispered about it. They told warnings about it. They planned their lives around it. Because winter was the real ruler of the medieval world. Not kings. Not lords. Not armies. Winter. Silent. Patient. Watching. And when it finally arrived, it didn't knock. It simply stepped in, and waited to see who was ready. In the Middle Ages, a house was not a home sweet home. It was more like a life pod. A survival shell. A human turtle shell. A please don't let winter eat me box. Villagers did not build houses to look cute. They built them to survive cold, wind, rain, snow, and whatever else the sky felt like throwing down that year. Style was not on the mood board. Survival was. Most medieval village houses were made from what was nearby. Trees. Mud. Straw. Animal hair. Not fancy marble. Not bricks fired in big ovens. Just raw, local stuff that smelled like earth and sheep. The walls were often wattle and daub. Wattle was a woven cage of thin sticks. Daub was thick mud mixed with straw, dung, and sometimes animal hair. This goopy mix was slapped into the wooden lattice until it dried into solid walls. Sounds gross. Worked great. Once dry, those walls were thick and slow to lose heat. They were like early versions of thermal hoodies. Not perfect. But better than nothing. And in winter, nothing was dangerous. The frames were made of timber beams. Big, chunky wood bones holding the house together. You could see these beams inside and outside. It looked a bit like the house had ribs. Which honestly makes sense. These homes were basically little wooden animals trying not to freeze. Now let's talk size. Medieval houses were small. Low ceilings. Narrow rooms. Tight spaces. Not because people liked bumping into things, but because small spaces are easier to keep warm. Big rooms equals more air. More air equals more cold. More cold equals more sadness. So villagers made their houses short and compact. Warmth stayed closer to the ground. Fires worked better. Bodies heated the room faster. It was basic survival math. And yes, it was dark. Very dark. Windows were tiny. Sometimes just holes in the wall with wooden shutters. Glass was expensive and rare. So most homes used shutters, cloth, or animal skin to block wind. Why so small? Because every window was a hole where winter could whisper, "Hello, I'm back." Tiny windows meant less wind, less cold, less snow drifting inside like it paid rent. If you stood inside a medieval house at noon, you would not see bright sunshine. You would see soft gray light. Shadows. Flickering fire glow. It felt more like a cave than a living room. And that was the point. Dark meant warmer. Now look up. The roof. Thatched roofs were common. They were made of straw, reeds, or grass, tied and layered thick on wooden frames. From far away, they looked fluffy. From inside, they were brilliant. Thatch trapped air. Air is a great insulator. That roof was basically a giant warm blanket for the house. Snow could sit on top. Rain could run down. Wind struggled to get through. It kept the heat inside and the cold out. Downside? It could catch fire. Upside? You were not frozen. People chose warmth. Now let's step inside the house. There was usually one main room. Sometimes two if the family was lucky. The fire sat in the center or near the wall. Not in a fireplace like today, but an open hearth. No chimney. Just a hole in the roof. This smoke hole mattered more than windows. Because smoke had to leave. If it didn't, the house turned into a foggy nightmare. Eyes burned. Lungs hurt. Everyone smelled like a campfire that lost a fight. The smoke hole let smoke escape slowly while still keeping warmth inside. It was carefully sized, not too big, not too small. Like a medieval air filter. The fire burned all day in winter. Cooking. Heating. Lighting. Drying clothes. Warming hands. Everything happened around that flame. The hearth was the heart. Benches, beds, stools, tools, everything faced the fire. Even conversations rotated around it. The warm side was the good side. Animals sometimes shared the house too. Chickens. Goats. A cow in a corner stall. Why? Because animals made heat. And heat was precious. You were not just sharing space. You were sharing survival. The floor was usually packed dirt or clay. Cold, yes. But rugs, straw, and wood boards were added where people slept. Every layer mattered. Even a thin mat could save toes. And the walls? They were not smooth like today. They were rough, lumpy, and thick. But they held heat better than thin stone. Mud doesn't look fancy, but it does not betray you to winter as easily. The whole house worked like a shield. Low. Tight. Thick. Warm. Every design choice whispered the same message. Stay alive. Medieval homes were not pretty Instagram cottages. They were little forts against cold, wind, and long nights. Built by hands that knew winter personally. Built by families who lost people to cold before. Built by communities that learned the hard way. When a storm hit and snow piled up, these houses huddled into the ground. Smoke rose slowly into gray skies. Light glowed from tiny holes in walls. Inside, people sat close. The fire crackled. Shadows danced. Wind pressed its cold face against the walls, and stayed outside. The house did its job. It held back the night. In a medieval village, fire was not nice to have. Fire was everything. It was heat. It was light. It was food. It was safety. It was survival wearing a glowing orange coat. If your house had a fire, you had a chance. If your house did not, winter was already sharpening its teeth. The hearth was the center of the home. Not just physically, but emotionally. It was where people sat, cooked, dried clothes, told stories, and quietly judged whose turn it was to fetch more wood. The fire didn't just warm the room. It warmed life. You could tell how serious winter was by how closely people hugged the hearth. On mild days, folks spread out. On deep winter nights, they formed a human circle like penguins. The hearth was sacred space. Not fancy sacred. Practical sacred. It was where babies were warmed. Where soups bubbled. Where tired hands rested. Where shoes dried. Where frozen fingers slowly came back to life and reminded you they still existed, loudly. Fire gave light too. And light mattered. Without fire, the night was not just dark. It was empty. No screens. No lamps. Just black. Fire pushed the dark back. It made shadows. It made movement. It made the house feel alive instead of abandoned. So fires were rarely allowed to go out. Ever. If a fire died in winter, restarting it was hard. You didn't have a lighter. You didn't have matches. You had flint, steel, dry tinder, and patience. Cold fingers and tiny sparks are not best friends. So most homes kept their hearth burning day and night during winter. Even when people slept. Even when the house went quiet. The fire stayed awake. Someone always kept watch. Yes. Night watch duty. Not to guard treasure. Not to stop thieves. To protect the fire. A family member would sleep lightly near the hearth. They would wake up to check embers. Add a small log. Move ash. Make sure the glow did not fade too much. Imagine being the fire babysitter at 3 a.m. while everyone else is warm and snoring. But this was serious work. If the fire went out, the whole house felt it. And people did not trust fire to behave without supervision. Fire was helpful, but also wild. So superstitions grew around it. Villagers believed fire had a spirit. That it could hear. That it could be offended. That it could bring luck or take it away. You did not spit in the fire. You did not throw dirty things into it. You did not curse near it. Some families said quiet prayers when lighting the hearth in winter. Others sprinkled a bit of salt into the flames for protection. Some would save a glowing ember on special nights, believing it carried good fortune into the next day. Fire was treated like a living guest. A bright, warm, slightly dangerous guest. On winter nights, the hearth became a stage. Stories were told beside it. Old tales. Funny tales. Scary tales. Tales about wolves, spirits, saints, lost travelers, and villages that forgot to prepare for winter and paid for it. The fire crackled like it was reacting to the stories. Like it had opinions. People ate from pots that hung over the flames. Thick stews. Dark bread. Whatever was stored from autumn. The hearth turned simple food into warm food, which somehow tasted better when your fingers were numb. And clothes? Wet cloaks, frozen boots, damp socks. All hung around the hearth like tired soldiers returning from battle. Fire was the only dryer in town. Now let's talk about the nightmare scenario. What if the fire went out? In summer, annoying. In winter, dangerous. A dead hearth meant cold spreading fast. Water freezing. Breath turning sharp. Darkness pressing in. Relighting could take a long time. Flint sparks could miss. Tinder could be damp. Wind could mess with your patience. And while you fought tiny sparks, your house slowly became a refrigerator. If your fire died at night, you didn't just wake up cold. You woke up worried. Some families would send a child or a neighbor running to borrow hot embers from another house. People shared fire like you'd share sugar today. Because tomorrow, you might be the one knocking on their door with shaking hands. Villages were small. Fire was shared. Survival was shared. Losing fire felt personal. It felt like winter had stepped inside your home. There were stories of homes where the fire went out and illness followed. Or animals froze. Or babies got sick. Whether true or not, the fear stayed. Fire was not just warmth. It was protection. You can feel this in medieval sayings and customs. Fire was often linked with luck, life, and family unity. It was where marriages were blessed. Where guests were welcomed. Where arguments were settled. If the hearth was strong, the home felt strong. So every night, embers were banked carefully. Ash was shaped like a blanket over glowing coals. Wood was stacked within reach. Someone always made sure tomorrow's fire already existed inside today's. Because once winter ruled the land, the hearth became your heartbeat. Quiet. Steady. Always awake. As long as that orange glow lived, the house lived too. Sleeping in the Middle Ages was not a cozy, pillow and blanket situation. It was more like a nightly survival challenge. You were not just going to bed. You were preparing to face 8 hours of cold, dark, quiet, and the possibility that your toes might disappear. Let's talk about the room first. Medieval bedrooms were cold. Even if the hearth had been burning all day, heat faded fast at night. Fires were banked down to glowing embers. Wind slipped through tiny cracks. Stone, mud, and wood slowly gave their warmth back to the night air. So when bedtime came, people did not say, "Good night." They said, "All right. Let's not freeze." Beds were simple. Wooden frames, often low to the ground. No box springs. No memory foam. Just a frame, a few planks, and on top, a straw mattress. Yes. Straw. Inside a thick cloth sack were dried grasses, hay, straw, sometimes feathers if you were lucky, and occasionally dried leaves. This sack became your mattress. Was it soft? Not really. Was it better than sleeping on dirt? Very much yes. Straw trapped air. Air trapped warmth. So even if it poked you in places you didn't know you had, it also kept you warmer than bare boards. And these mattresses were shaken out, refluffed, and refilled often. Over time they flattened, smelled odd, and sometimes hosted surprise bugs. Medieval life kept you humble. Now, sharing beds. This was normal. Very normal. Families shared beds. Siblings shared beds. Guests shared beds. Sometimes even strangers shared beds at inns. Not for awkward reasons, but because heat multiplies. 2 bodies in one bed were warmer than 1. 3 were even better. It was not romance. It was physics. People joked that you could tell how cold it was by how many people ended up in the same bed. Kids slept with parents. Brothers slept together. Grandparents took the warm middle spot. If you were small, you were used as a living hot water bottle. Nobody complained. Everyone understood the assignment. Now let's talk about the secret medieval sleep weapon. Bed curtains. Many beds had thick curtains that hung from a wooden frame above. These curtains wrapped around the bed like a tent. Once closed, they trapped warm air inside. This was the medieval version of a sleep pod. Inside, your breath warmed the space. Your body warmed the straw mattress. Your blankets warmed everything else. Outside, the room stayed cold and dark. Inside, you had your own tiny warm cave. Curtains also blocked drafts, noise, and light. They even gave privacy in one-room homes where everyone lived, worked, cooked, and slept together. If you had bed curtains, you were living large. Now clothing. People did not sleep naked. Ever. That would have been madness. They slept in layers. Long linen shirts. Wool nightcaps. Thick socks. Sometimes even cloaks if it was bitter cold. Nightcaps were especially important because you lose heat through your head. Plus, they made you look like a tired wizard, which is always a bonus. Wool was king. Wool kept heat even when damp. It was itchy, but it worked. And itchy was better than frozen. Some people wrapped their feet in cloth. Others tucked hot stones or bricks near their legs before bed. Anything to keep blood moving and toes attached. Now sleeping positions. People often slept curled up. On their sides. Knees drawn in. Like cats. This kept body heat close and reduced exposed skin. Flat on your back in winter. Risky behavior. And speaking of cats. Animals were part of bedtime too. Cats slept on feet. Dogs slept near legs. Chickens sometimes slept in corners of the room. Goats and sheep might share the house. Why? Heat. Animals were warm. Their breathing added warmth to the air. Their bodies were like fuzzy space heaters that sometimes smelled funny. A cat on your stomach was not annoying. It was life-saving. A dog by your legs was not a pet. It was a blanket with opinions. Chickens were not great cuddle buddies, but they added warmth to the room. Also, they were easier to guard indoors than outside. Now imagine all this together. A low wooden bed. Straw mattress. Thick blankets. 3 family members. Curtains closed. Socks on. Nightcaps pulled low. A cat on your feet. A dog by your side. A quiet fire glowing in the corner. Outside, wind howls. Snow falls. The village is dark and silent. Inside, the bed becomes a small island of warmth in a frozen world. Sleeping was not about comfort. It was about staying alive until morning. And when you woke up, stiff, sleepy, and still a bit cold, you knew you had won another round against winter. Quiet victory. Medieval fashion was not about looking cool. It was about not turning into an ice statue. Every shirt, sock, hood, and cloak had one main job. Keep your body heat from running away into the cold night. There were no space heaters. No heated seats. No warm fleece hoodie ads. So villagers wore the farm. Literally. Their clothes were made from sheep, flax plants, and whatever could be grown, spun, and stitched by tired hands. Let's start with the science part. Warmth is simple. Your body makes heat. Your clothes try to keep it close. The more air you trap around your skin, the warmer you feel. Medieval people did not say thermal insulation, but they understood it with their bones. More layers equals more trapped air equals less freezing. And their champion fabric was wool. Wool was the superhero of medieval clothing. Sheep hair was thick, curly, and full of tiny air pockets. That meant it trapped warmth better than most natural fibers. Even better, it stayed warm when wet. Which is huge. Because snow, rain, fog, and damp were part of daily life. If your wool cloak got wet, you were still warm. If your linen shirt got wet, you felt like a sad noodle. So wool went on the outside. Cloaks, coats, hoods, leggings, mittens, socks, all wool. It was scratchy. It smelled like sheep. But it worked. Villagers trusted wool with their lives. Under the wool, they wore linen. Linen came from flax plants. It was lighter, smoother, and nicer on the skin. It soaked up sweat and kept your body from getting too damp inside heavy layers. Think of linen as your medieval base layer. It caught sweat. It kept your skin drier. It helped your wool do its job better. People often wore long linen shirts and linen leggings under everything else. These layers trapped warm air close to the body and kept cold fabrics from touching bare skin. Layering was not fashion. It was survival math. Now let's build the outfit. On top, a thick wool tunic. Over that, a heavy wool cloak. On your head, a hood that wrapped around your neck. On your hands, wool mittens or gloves. On your legs, wool hose. On your feet, leather shoes with wool socks and foot wraps. Foot wraps were long strips of cloth wrapped around feet and ankles. They added warmth and protected skin from cold leather. Think of them as medieval thermal socks with extra steps. If you looked like a walking pile of blankets, you were dressed correctly. Color? Nobody cared. Bright colors were nice but expensive. Dyes cost money and time. In winter, thickness mattered more than looking fancy. Brown, gray, dull red, faded blue, whatever came from natural dyes was fine. If your cloak was thick, it was beautiful. Now let's talk about reuse. Medieval clothes were not thrown away. Ever. Clothes were repaired, patched, resewn, resized, and passed down until they were basically fabric ghosts. A tunic might start as your good shirt, then become your work shirt, then your sleeping shirt, then a cleaning rag, then a patch on someone else's shirt. Nothing died easily. Every hole was stitched. Every tear was tied. Patches stacked on patches. Some clothes looked like quilts made of mistakes. But they still worked. Warmth did not care how ugly you were. People also layered old clothes under new ones. Even thin, worn fabric trapped air. Even ripped linen helped. Winter turned everyone into a fabric hoarder. Mittens were often fingerless. Why? Because fingers together stay warmer than fingers alone. Also, sewing tiny finger sleeves was annoying. Hoods were long and could be wrapped around the neck and face. Some people pulled them up so only their eyes showed. Medieval ninja vibes, but cold edition. And cloaks were the real heroes. Big, heavy, wool cloaks wrapped around the whole body. They blocked wind. They trapped heat. They could be used as blankets. They could cover your head. They could carry things. Cloaks were wearable shelter. If your cloak was thick, you could survive almost anything. Some people even slept in their cloaks. Because if your fire died in the night, your cloak might save you. And yes, everything smelled. Wool smelled like sheep. Linen smelled like smoke. Leather smelled like animal. Winter villages smelled like life, fire, and animals. Clean laundry was rare. Warm laundry was rare. Nobody complained. Cold was worse than smell. So medieval villagers walked through winter wrapped in layers of sheep, flax, patches, and hope. Their clothes were heavy, dull, and sometimes itchy, but they kept bodies alive. They were not wearing outfits. They were wearing survival. In the Middle Ages, food was not just food. It was fuel. It was heat. It was medicine. It was emotional support in a bowl. When winter showed up, villagers did not say, "Let's eat light." They said, "Let's eat like we are about to fight a snow monster." Cold burns calories. Your body has to work harder just to stay warm. Medieval people did not know the word metabolism, but they knew hunger hit harder in winter. You could feel your stomach asking for backup. So winter meals got heavy. Thick. Steamy. Filling. If it could stick to your ribs, it was invited. The king of winter food was the stew. Big iron pots sat over hearth fires all day. Inside. Beans, peas, onions, cabbage, turnips, leeks, barley, and whatever meat could be spared. Sometimes pork. Sometimes bacon bits. Sometimes bones with a bit of mystery meat still attached. Stews bubbled slowly. They smelled like warmth. You could smell dinner from halfway across the village. Broths were lighter but still important. Warm liquid meant warm insides. Sick people drank broth. Tired people drank broth. Cold hands wrapped around bowls of broth like they were hugging them. And bread. Bread was life. Dark, dense, heavy bread made from rye, barley, or mixed grains. Not fluffy. Not white. But filling. A single slice could feel like a brick of hope. Bread dipped in stew. Bread dipped in broth. Bread dipped in everything. Now let's talk fat. Fat was winter medicine. Lard, butter, dripping, bacon grease, these were not bad. They were survival tools. Fat meant calories. Calories meant heat. Heat meant staying alive. Villagers saved fat carefully. They added it to stews. Spread it on bread. Cooked everything in it. If your food glistened, it was probably doing you a favor. People could feel the difference. A fatty meal kept you warmer longer. Lean food filled your stomach but did not protect your bones from cold as well. So winter plates looked shiny. And nobody apologized. Spices were also important. Not just for taste. For warmth. Pepper, ginger, cloves, cinnamon, mustard, if you could afford them, were believed to warm the body. They made you feel hotter inside. They made your nose tingle. Your mouth wake up. Your stomach say, "Oh, we are working now." Spices were expensive, but even a little bit felt powerful. They were used in stews, in drinks, and in special winter meals. Now, beer. Warm beer. Yes. Warm. Villagers drank ale daily. Not just for fun, but because water was risky, and ale was safer. In winter, they often warmed it. Warm ale before bed was common. It warmed the stomach. Relaxed the body. Helped people sleep. It was medieval hot chocolate, but more bitter and less cute. Some people added spices or honey to their ale. This turned it into a cozy night drink that made you feel like winter was less rude. And psychologically, food mattered even more. Winter was dark. Long quiet. Lonely. Hard. A hot meal was not just fuel. It was comfort. It was a moment where the world felt kinder. A bowl of stew meant, you made it through today. Families gathered around pots. They shared bread. They laughed. They told stories. Food made winter nights feel human instead of endless. Children waited by the fire for dinner like it was a holiday. Adults leaned closer to bowls like they were old friends. Food was warmth you could eat. Even simple meals felt special in winter. Because everything was harder. Cooking took longer. Wood had to be carried. Water had to be fetched. Nothing was easy. So when a hot meal finally arrived, it felt like a small victory. People ate slower. They scraped bowls clean. They saved leftovers carefully. Food was not wasted. You didn't know what storms were coming. You didn't know if roads would close. You didn't know if your grain would last. So every bite mattered. Eating was not a break from survival. Eating was survival. In winter, villagers were not just filling their stomachs. They were feeding their fire from the inside. In medieval winter, your house was not just your house. It was also a barn. A chicken hotel. A goat lounge. And sometimes, a pig bedroom. This was not because villagers were emotionally attached to their pigs. It was because pigs were warm. And warmth was life. When winter hit, animals were moved closer to people. Not out of kindness, out of survival math. Animal bodies made heat. Lots of it. And medieval homes were built to collect every bit of warmth they could steal from the universe. So livestock came inside. Or at least very close. Many village homes were barn houses. One side for people. One side for animals. Sometimes only a wooden wall between them. Sometimes not even that. Just a low fence and a lot of trust. Cows, goats, sheep, pigs, and chickens all shared the same roof as humans. Not fancy. Not cute. But very effective. A cow is basically a living furnace. A pig is a walking heat pack. A flock of chickens is like a group chat of tiny heaters. Their breathing warmed the air. Their bodies radiated heat all night. Their movement kept air from sitting still and getting colder. At night, when fires were low and wind pushed against walls, the animals kept the house from freezing solid. People did not say, "Good night, cow." They said, "Thank you for the heat." Animals were also safer indoors. Wolves, thieves, storms, and sickness were less likely to steal your animals if they were sleeping 10 steps away from you. Livestock was money. Food. Milk. Eggs. Leather. Warmth. Losing an animal in winter hurt badly. So keeping them close was smart. Goats slept near walls. Chickens perched in corners. Pigs found warm straw and flopped down like they paid rent. Some animals even slept under beds. Yes. Under beds. A pig under your bed was not weird. It was warm. The soundscape was lively. Snorts. Clucks. Shuffling hooves. Gentle chewing. The occasional angry chicken argument at 3 a.m. If you grew up in this world, these sounds were comforting. They meant your animals were alive. They meant heat was happening. Silence from the animal side was scarier than noise. Now the smells. Let's be honest. It was not fresh. Animals came with smells. Straw got dirty. Manure happened. Breath smelled. Life smelled. But cold was worse than smell. People burned herbs. They scattered fresh straw. They swept floors. They opened doors briefly on mild days. But winter houses were still, very natural. And everyone accepted it. Because warmth did not smell like roses. Animals were not just heaters. They were part of the household rhythm. You fed them in the dark. You checked on them at night. You listened for sick sounds. You knew each animal's voice. A coughing goat could mean trouble. A restless pig could mean cold drafts. A quiet cow could mean illness. Animals were winter alarms. Some villagers even believed animals could sense storms before humans. If chickens got weird, snow might be coming. If cows got restless, wind might be on the way. Whether true or not, people watched their animals closely. Because animals and humans were fighting winter together. Now imagine a winter night. Snow falling. Wind pushing against the walls. Fire glowing low. Family wrapped in blankets. A cow breathing slow. Chickens tucked into straw. A pig snoring softly like a hairy uncle. The house feels alive. Warm breath fills the air. Life moves in the shadows. The building hums quietly with bodies. This was not dirty chaos. This was organized survival. People and animals sharing heat. Sharing space. Sharing risk. If winter was harsh, everyone felt it. If a storm hit, everyone waited it out together. There was no outside world and inside comfort. There was just shelter. So medieval villagers did not just live with animals. They survived with them. They slept beside them. They trusted them. And in the long, cold nights, those warm animal bodies quietly helped keep the village alive. When the sun went down in a medieval village, the world did not slowly dim. It basically vanished. No street lights. No glowing windows down the road. No screens lighting up faces. Just dark. Thick dark. The kind that feels like it has weight. Winter made nights arrive early. Sometimes before people even finished their afternoon work. 1 minute you're tying up goats, the next minute, boom, it's night and your hands are suddenly guessing where things are. So evenings became short and careful. Light was limited. Candles were expensive. Tallow was precious. Oil lamps were dim. So nobody lit 10 candles to set the mood. They used 1. Maybe 2. And they treated them like gold. Firelight did most of the work. The hearth glowed orange. Shadows danced on walls. Faces looked half light, half shadow. Everything felt calm, quiet, and slightly mysterious, like the whole village was whispering. Evenings were for gathering. Families pulled stools close to the fire. Children leaned into blankets. Old people settled where the heat was strongest. Animals shifted in straw. The house became one warm circle. Talking started soft. Stories came out. Not fancy fairy tales, but old village stories. Stories about winters that were worse. About storms that buried roads. About wolves that watched from forests. About saints that protected travelers. About people who forgot to prepare and had a very bad winter. These stories were entertainment and warning signs. Do this. Don't do that. Respect winter. Prayers were common too. Before sleep, people thanked God for making it through the day. They asked for protection during the night. They asked for animals to stay healthy. They asked for fire not to die. Winter prayers were serious prayers. Simple games sometimes happened. Not board games. More like riddles, guessing games, or quiet contests. Kids tried to stay awake. Adults pretended not to notice. Then came the quiet work. By firelight, people repaired things. Clothes were patched. Holes stitched. Tools checked. Broken handles retied. Boots examined. Everything that could be fixed now would not break in a snowstorm later. Hands moved slowly in the orange glow. Needles flashed. Thread slid through cloth. Shadows stretched. This was calm work. Almost meditative. The kind that makes your eyelids heavy. Children were the first to fall asleep. They curled up near the fire. Heads on laps. Fingers still holding bread. Slow breathing. Soft snores. Parents wrapped them in cloaks and carried them to bed. Or just let them sleep where they were if it was warm enough. The house grew quieter. Outside, winter made noise. Wind moved through trees like something breathing. Snow whispered. Branches cracked. Sometimes far-off howls rolled through the night. Wolves. Not a bedtime story, real wolves. Villagers knew those sounds. They did not panic. But they listened. Wolves meant deep winter. Wolves meant hunger in the forest. Wolves meant, keep animals close. Doors were checked. Shutters closed. Fires watched. The village held its breath. Inside, candles were blown out carefully. Darkness wrapped the room. Only the hearth glow remained, like a sleeping eye. People whispered goodnights. Beds creaked. Curtains closed. Blankets tucked. Nightcaps pulled down. The fire babysitter took their place. Someone always stayed half awake. Listening. Watching the embers. Feeding the glow. And slowly, the village fell into sleep. Not deep sleep. Careful sleep. The kind of sleep you take when the world outside is cold, quiet, and watching. There is a moment in every winter night when the world feels paused. Not asleep. Not awake. Just quiet in a deep, heavy way. In medieval villages, that moment lived between about 3 and 5 in the morning. The deepest hours before dawn. These were the coldest hours. The darkest hours. The most dangerous hours. The time when winter leaned in closest and asked, very politely, "So, are you still alive?" All the warmth from the day was gone. Fires had burned down to their weakest glow. Wind had found every tiny crack in walls. Snow lay heavy and still. Even animals breathed softer. This was the hour when things happened. People believed bad things like this time. Illness felt stronger. Spirits felt closer. Wolves felt braver. And cold felt personal. Now let's talk about the fire. By this hour, hearth embers were low. Orange had faded to red. Red faded to dark. If nobody checked the fire, it could die completely. So someone always did. A father. A mother. An older child. A grandparent. Someone who slept light and woke easily. They would rise slowly, wrapped in cloaks, feet searching for warm slippers. They would kneel by the hearth, poke the ash, breathe on embers, slide a small log into place, and wait for glow to return. This was not loud work. This was quiet, careful, sacred work. If the fire came back, the house stayed alive. If it didn't, things got tense. Because restarting a fire at 4 in the morning in freezing air was not fun. Cold fingers. Damp tinder. Tiny sparks. Heavy sighs. Everyone silently hoping the fire would cooperate. Now, the fears. Wolves were real. In winter, forests grew quiet. Food got scarce. Wolves came closer to villages. Their howls rolled through the dark like long questions. Villagers listened. Counted how many voices they heard. Guessed how far away they were. Dogs woke up. Chickens rustled. Cows shifted. People tightened blankets. Wolves were not monsters, but they were hungry. And hunger makes bold decisions. Spirits were also believed to be active at this hour. People thought ghosts, wandering souls, and winter spirits moved when the world was most silent. When human activity was lowest. When the night felt thick. Stories said this was when you heard footsteps that weren't there. Or whispers in wind. Or saw shapes move near trees. Whether real or not, fear was real. And illness. Cold air made lungs weak. Long nights made bodies tired. Fevers often hit in the early morning. A cough in the dark could feel scary. A baby stirring could wake everyone. People believed sickness traveled easier at night. That it crept like frost. So families listened to each other's breathing. Quiet listening was a skill. Some villages had night watches. A few men would take turns walking slow circles around the village. Lanterns in hand. Listening for trouble. Watching for fire, thieves, wolves, or storms. In larger villages, bells were used. If danger appeared, a fire, a wolf attack, a stranger, bells would ring. Loud. Sharp. Sudden. Pulling everyone out of sleep like a shout. The bell was the village's voice. At 3 in the morning, hearing the bell was serious. People jumped up. Fires were stirred. Doors opened. Names were called. But on calm nights, the bell stayed quiet. And that quiet was heavy. Inside houses, people slept shallow. Wrapped in layers. Cats curled on feet. Dogs shifted near doors. Animals breathed slowly. The fire babysitter kept watch. Time felt slow. The darkest hour before dawn felt longer than any other part of night. People did not measure it by clocks. They measured it by how cold their noses felt. But then, very slowly, the dark loosened. The sky shifted from black to deep blue. The cold was still strong, but it was changing. Somewhere, birds began to think about singing. Somewhere, the village took its first quiet breath of morning. Winter had not won that night. People had. Not every winter ended with a quiet victory. Sometimes, winter won. Cold did not just make people uncomfortable. It could make them sick. It could make them weak. And sometimes, it could take them. Medieval villagers knew this. They felt it in their bones. Literally. When heat ran low, bodies paid the price. Let's start with illness. Cold air hurt lungs. Damp air made breathing harder. Smoke from hearth fires filled small rooms. People coughed a lot. Chests burned. Throats stayed sore. And winter made everything worse. Pneumonia was common. Fevers rose fast. Breathing got shallow. A strong cough could turn serious in days. There were no antibiotics. No oxygen tanks. No warm hospital rooms. There was fire. Blankets. Broth. Prayers. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it didn't. People also got weaker in winter. Food was limited. Fresh fruits and vegetables were rare. Bodies ran low on strength. Immune systems slowed down. A small illness could turn into something bigger. A cold could become a chest sickness. A cough could become a long goodbye. Frostbite was another danger. Hands, feet, ears, and noses took the worst hits. People worked outside even in snow. Water had to be fetched. Animals had to be fed. Wood had to be chopped. Cold fingers went numb. Then pale. Then hard. Sometimes people did not notice damage until it was too late. Skin could turn dark. Pain could fade, which was worse. In serious cases, fingers or toes were lost. Not dramatic stories. Real life. Poor heating shaped life expectancy more than people realize. Houses were warm near the fire, but cold everywhere else. Long nights chilled bodies over and over again. Sleep was shallow. Rest was never perfect. Winter stress aged people faster. Older villagers struggled the most. Babies too. Winter was a filter. Quiet and slow. Now the emotional side. Winter deaths felt heavier. The village was quiet. Snow muffled sound. Work slowed down. When someone died, it was not hidden behind busy streets or loud markets. Everyone knew. A fire went cold in a house. Smoke did not rise. Shutters stayed closed. Neighbors noticed. People brought bread. Broth. Candles. Quiet words. Grief sat heavy in cold rooms. Funerals were simple. Serious. No long speeches. Just prayers, tears, and still air. And then came the hardest part. Burial. Frozen ground was brutal. In deep winter, soil turned into stone. Shovels bounced. Picks chipped. Digging a grave could take hours. Sometimes days. Villagers had to work in freezing wind, breaking ground piece by piece. Hands numb. Breath white. Shoulders aching. Sometimes bodies were kept inside longer than usual, waiting for the ground to soften a little. Wrapped carefully. Watched by candles. Not out of neglect, but because the earth would not open. Churchyards looked quiet and white. But beneath that snow, there was work, sorrow, and tired arms. Winter death changed how people thought. It made them careful. It made them prepare. It made them respectful of cold. It made them grateful for every warm morning. When spring came, it did not just bring flowers. It brought relief. It meant winter had loosened its grip. And for many families, it meant they had survived another long fight, even if not everyone made it through. Winter did not always roar. Sometimes it whispered. And that whisper could still change lives. When winter got quiet, people got loud with prayers. Not loud in a shouting way. Loud in a meaningful way. In the Middle Ages, faith was not something you visited once a week and forgot about. It was something you wore in your heart, like another layer of clothing. Because when the world felt frozen, you needed something warm inside too. Religion became emotional insulation. Fire warmed the hands. Faith warmed the mind. When storms howled and snow pressed against shutters, people did not just check the fire. They whispered prayers. They touched small wooden crosses. They made signs over their chests. They asked for protection. Winter made people feel small. Faith made them feel watched over. Certain saints were believed to help with cold, sickness, and danger. Saint Nicholas was asked to protect children. Saint Blaise was asked to protect throats and breathing. Saint Martin was known for kindness and warmth. Local saints had their own winter reputations. People prayed for warm homes, healthy animals, safe births, and strong bodies. They did not pray for luxury. They prayed for, "Please let us make it through this week." Homes were often blessed. Priests would sprinkle holy water on hearths, doors, and sleeping spaces. The hearth was especially important. It was the heart of the home, and people wanted God's eye on it. Some families said short prayers before lighting the fire in winter, asking it to burn steady and kind. Fire was seen as a gift, not just a tool. Church bells mattered too. In winter nights, bells were not just for church time. They were comfort. Hearing a bell in the dark meant your village was still alive. Still organized. Still connected. A bell could warn of danger, but it could also calm fears. It reminded people they were not alone in the cold. Candles were sacred warmth. They were used in prayer. In sick rooms. In death watches. Their soft light felt gentle, hopeful, and steady. Even one candle could change the mood of a dark room. Candles were treated carefully. They were not wasted. They were lit with purpose. Light was holy. Warmth was holy. Survival felt holy. Winter did not just test bodies. It tested hearts. Faith helped people keep both alive. Winter did not only freeze fingers. It froze thoughts. It froze hope. It froze patience. So medieval villagers wrapped their minds in something warm. Faith. Religion was not just church on Sunday. It was emotional insulation. It was what people used when their breath turned white inside their own houses and the fire felt small against a big night. When the wind screamed through trees and snow stacked on roofs, villagers did two things. They added wood to the hearth. And they whispered prayers. Because winter made people feel tiny. And faith made them feel watched. People prayed to specific saints like they were calling old friends who lived in the sky. Saint Nicholas for children. Saint Blaise for throats and lungs. Saint Martin for kindness and warmth. Saint Barbara for storms and sudden death. Local saints for local problems. Each saint had a job. Winter kept them busy. Prayers were not fancy speeches. They were short, serious, honest lines. Keep my baby breathing. Keep my cow alive. Let the fire burn till morning. Let us see spring. People prayed while cooking. While walking. While lying awake in bed listening to wind. Faith was carried like a pocket charm. Homes were blessed often. A priest would visit, sprinkle holy water on doors, windows, and especially the hearth. Because the hearth was life. It was warmth. It was food. It was light. And if anything needed protection, it was that orange glow in the corner. Some families made a small sign of the cross over new fires. Others said a prayer before adding the last log at night. Fire was treated like a gift. A fragile gift. Church bells had a new job in winter. Yes, they called people to prayer. But they also calmed fear. Hearing bells in the dark reminded villagers that they were not alone. That the village was awake somewhere. That people were watching the night together. On stormy nights, bells sounded deeper. Slower. Heavier. Their echo rolled through snow and fog like a heartbeat for the whole village. Candles were sacred warmth. They were not just light. They were symbols. Hope in wax form. Candles were lit for sick people. For women giving birth. For prayers. For death watches. One small flame could change how a room felt. It made the dark softer. Less sharp. Candles were never wasted. They were lit for reasons. And those reasons mattered. Light was seen as holy. Warmth was seen as holy. Staying alive was seen as holy. Faith gave winter a meaning. It made suffering feel less lonely. It gave people something to hold inside when their hands could not get warm. Winter tested bodies. Faith tested hearts. And together, they helped villages last through the long cold nights. When winter settled over a medieval village, it did more than freeze water. It froze courage. Nights got long. Forests went silent. Snow covered paths like the world was trying to hide itself. And when the dark stretched for hours, people started to feel like something else might be stretching too. So fear grew stories. People did not just fear cold. They feared what cold might bring with it. Because cold was not seen as random. It felt personal. Like a punishment. Like a test. Like the sky saying, let's see who remembered to be careful. If crops failed, maybe someone had angered God. If animals died, maybe bad spirits had passed through. If a child got sick, maybe something unseen had entered the house. Winter made invisible things feel closer. Now enter the winter spirits. Every region had its own caste of night creatures. Some villages talked about frost demons, pale figures that walked in snowstorms and stole breath from sleeping people. They were said to freeze noses, fingers, and hearts. Others feared wandering souls, spirits of those who died badly in winter and now walked the dark roads, looking for warmth they no longer had. Night witches were another favorite. Old stories said they flew with winter winds, whispered into chimneys, and cursed homes where fires went out. If your fire died and your baby got sick, people would whisper that a witch had passed by. Was it true? No. Did it feel true at 3 a.m. when the wind howled and your fire was low? Absolutely. So people protected their homes. Charms were hung above doors. Little wooden crosses. Dried herbs tied with string. Animal bones. Special stones. Anything believed to block bad spirits. Some families hung iron near doors because iron was thought to scare off unseen things. Others burned herbs to clean the air. Smoke was protection. Fire was protection. Light was protection. Even brooms were placed near doors or chimneys to confuse wandering spirits. Because obviously ghosts can't step over brooms. Everyone knows that. Medieval logic was strong. Children heard stories. Not gentle bedtime stories. Warning stories. Stories about kids who wandered into snow and never came back. About children who ignored the fire and got sick. About shadows that waited beyond lantern light. These stories were not meant to scare for fun. They were safety rules wrapped in fear. Stay near the fire. Don't wander into snow. Listen to your parents. Respect winter. Fear kept kids alive. So winter nights were full of whispers, charms, prayers, and glowing hearths. The dark was not empty. It was full of stories. And those stories helped villagers survive another long, cold night. But stories did more than scare. They organized life. They told people when to close doors. When to bank fires. When to call children inside. When to walk in pairs instead of alone. Folklore was medieval street lighting for the mind. It filled the dark with rules. If you heard knocking at night, don't open the door. If you heard your name whispered outside, stay inside. If your fire suddenly cracked loud, pay attention. If animals became restless, winter was planning something. People trusted signs more than forecasts. Because there were no forecasts. There was only sky, snow, and stories passed down like family recipes. Some villages believed winter spirits lived in forests. Others said they hid in snowbanks. Some said they slipped through chimneys if fires burned weak. So chimneys were watched closely. A dying fire was not just a cold house. It was an open door. Families would hurry to feed embers, whispering small prayers, just in case something unseen was listening. Children were taught early. They were told that snow could steal you. That forests could hide you. That darkness could move. Not because parents were cruel, but because winter did not forgive curiosity. Kids learned to love the fire. They sat close to it. Played near it. Fell asleep beside it. The hearth became safety, story, warmth, and light all in one. Outside the fire circle, the world felt different. Bigger. Colder. Stranger. Inside it, the world made sense. Even grown adults had habits shaped by superstition. Some stepped over thresholds carefully. Some touched iron before sleeping. Some left small bits of bread near doors for wandering souls, not as food, but as peace offerings. It was easier to leave a crumb than risk bad luck. No one wanted winter to notice their house too much. Silence mattered. A house that stayed calm, warm, and glowing was thought to be less interesting to dark spirits. Noise and chaos were invitations. So families moved quietly at night. They closed shutters gently. They spoke softer when snow was falling. The village learned to breathe slower in winter. Even laughter was quieter. Not sad. Just careful. Winter made everyone polite to the dark. And yet, these fears were not only heavy. They were comforting too. Because if something bad happened, it was not random. It had meaning. There was a story. There was a reason. There was something you could fix. Light more candles. Say more prayers. Burn herbs. Hang charms. Stay closer together. Fear gave people control. Even if that control lived in stories. So winter villages glowed softly in the dark. Tiny islands of firelight. Small homes whispering prayers. Charms swinging quietly above doors. Cats curled in warm corners. Children asleep near glowing embers. Beyond those walls, the forests waited. The snow fell. The wind walked through trees like something breathing. But inside, stories stood guard. They stood between families and the night. And in a world where winter ruled everything. Sometimes a story was as powerful as a flame. In medieval winter, you could not survive alone. Not really. You could try. You could stack wood, fill your pantry, patch your roof, and whisper prayers to every saint on the list. But when snow got deep, when nights got long, when cold settled into your bones like it owned the place, you needed people. Winter was a team sport. Survival was shared. Villages were not just random houses sitting near each other. They were living systems. Every home was a small fire. Together, they made a village-sized heartbeat. If one fire went out, everyone noticed. And usually, everyone helped. Fire sharing was common. If your hearth died and you couldn't get it going, you did not panic alone in the dark. You wrapped yourself in a cloak, grabbed a small pot or shovel, and went to your neighbor's door. They would give you hot embers. No questions. No judging. Because next week, it might be their fire that goes out. Fire was shared like bread. It was community heat. Food was shared too. If someone's stores ran low, neighbors brought bread, soup, or a bit of fat. No one kept score. Hunger did not wait for accounting. Villages also had watch systems. Not fancy guards. Just regular people taking turns walking slow paths at night. Listening for wolves. Watching for fire. Checking that doors were shut and animals were quiet. They were winter eyes. If something felt wrong, they warned others. A shout. A knock. A bell. And suddenly the village was awake and moving. Elderly villagers were watched closely. They felt cold deeper. They moved slower. They got sick easier. So neighbors checked in. Brought broth. Added wood to their fires. Made sure their roofs were not leaking. No one wanted winter to take the village elders. They carried stories. Skills. Memory. Losing one felt like losing part of the village's brain. The sick were never ignored. People brought warm drinks. Sat near beds. Lit candles. Prayed together. Watched breathing in the quiet hours. Being sick in winter was scary, but being sick alone was worse. Loneliness could be fatal. Not because it made you sad, but because no one noticed when you needed help. If you fell. If your fire died. If your food ran out. If your cough got bad. Someone else had to see it. So villages stayed connected. They knocked on doors. They listened for smoke. They counted lights at night. If a house stayed dark too long, people checked. Winter did not allow quiet disappearances. People survived because they watched each other. Because no one was meant to face winter alone. And that shared warmth, human warmth, mattered just as much as fire. Survival was shared. Always. Villages were built close on purpose. Houses leaned toward each other. Paths were short. Doors faced doors. It was not about privacy. It was about watching, listening, helping, and surviving together. Every home was like a candle. One flame alone is small. Many flames together make a warm night. People watched smoke. If your chimney did not smoke in winter, someone noticed. That meant your fire was weak. Or gone. Or something was wrong inside. Neighbors would knock. Not to gossip. To save you. Fire sharing was normal. If your hearth went out, you did not sit there and panic while your toes turned into ice cubes. You grabbed a pot, a shovel, even a bowl. And walked to the nearest warm door. Your neighbor handed you glowing embers. No speeches. No payment. Just heat. Fire was returned later, not with coins, but with trust. Because next time, it might be your fire that saves them. Food was shared too. Bread, broth, bits of meat, fat, winter meals moved quietly from house to house. Especially to families with babies, sick people, or very old grandparents. No one wanted winter to pick off the weak. Village watch systems were simple but powerful. At night, a few villagers took turns walking slow circles around the village. They carried lanterns. They listened. They checked doors. They counted lights. They were not guards. They were neighbors on duty. They listened for wolves. For strange footsteps. For fires burning wrong. For storms rising. If danger came, they warned everyone. A knock. A shout. A bell. The village woke up together. Elderly villagers were protected like treasure. They were slower, yes. But they held stories, skills, memory, and wisdom. Losing an elder felt like losing part of the village brain. So people brought wood. Checked roofs. Brought soup. Sat with them. Made sure they were warm. The sick were never left alone. People took turns sitting by beds. Bringing warm drinks. Watching breathing. Keeping candles lit. Whispering prayers. Being sick was scary. Being sick alone was dangerous. Loneliness could be fatal. Not because it hurt feelings, but because no one noticed when something went wrong. If you slipped and fell. If your fire died. If your cough worsened. If your food ran out. Someone had to see it. So villagers stayed connected. They knocked. They listened. They checked. Because winter was easier to fight when someone else stood beside you. And that shared warmth, human warmth, mattered just as much as fire. Spring did not arrive quietly. It crept in at first. Soft. Careful. Like it wasn't sure it was welcome yet. Then one morning, someone noticed snow melting from a roof. Another day, a path stayed muddy instead of frozen. A bird sang where only wind had been talking for months. And the whole village felt it. Relief. Not loud relief. Not jumping around relief. Deep relief. The kind you feel in your chest when something heavy finally steps off your shoulders. Winter had loosened its grip. The snow began to melt. Drips fell from roofs like slow music. Patches of brown earth appeared. Paths softened. Ice cracked on streams. The village, which had felt locked in place for months, slowly began to move again. Roads reopened. Not suddenly, but carefully. People tested paths with sticks. Wagons rolled slowly. Travelers returned. News returned. Trade returned. Life widened again. Villagers smiled more. Laughed easier. Walked farther. Houses were checked. Roofs were patched. Walls were inspected. Doors were fixed. Windows were widened. Thatch was replaced. Winter damage was counted like scars after a long fight. Tools were sharpened. Broken handles replaced. Carts were repaired. Plows came out of storage. Hands that had spent months holding bowls and blankets now held hammers and knives. Celebration meals appeared. Not fancy feasts, but happier meals. Fresh bread. New milk. Early greens. Honey. Extra fat. Warm ale raised in quiet toasts. People cooked outside again. Smoke drifted into blue skies instead of gray. Children ran more. Animals wandered farther. The village breathed bigger. And the light. The light stayed longer. Evening stretched. Shadows softened. Fire was used less. Candles were saved. Birdsong returned. Bees hummed. Water ran louder. The village sounded alive again. Spring did not erase winter. But it healed it. It whispered. You made it. And the village believed it. At first, it was just little hints. A drip from a roof. A patch of brown earth showing through snow. A bird that forgot winter rules and started singing like nothing ever happened. But the village noticed. And everyone felt the same thing in their chest. Relief. Not the loud, jumping kind. The quiet kind. The kind that makes you breathe deeper without realizing it. Winter had finally stepped back. Snow began to melt. Not fast. Not dramatic. Just slow drips, soft mud, and tiny rivers running through old paths. Roofs stopped holding white blankets. Stones peeked out. Fences showed their tired faces again. People tested the roads with sticks. Wheels rolled for the first time in months. Someone walked farther than usual just because they could. The village began to stretch. Travelers returned. News returned. Trade returned. Life widened. Houses were checked like tired bodies after a long fight. Roofs were patched. Thatch was replaced. Walls were filled with fresh mud. Doors were straightened. Shutters were rehung. Every house had winter scars. And now it was time to heal them. Tools came back to life. Plows were pulled out. Knives were sharpened. Broken handles were fixed. Carts were repaired. Wood piles were moved. Hands that spent winter holding bowls and blankets now held hammers and ropes. And food changed. Celebration meals appeared. Not giant feasts, but better meals. Fresh bread. New milk. Soft cheese. Early greens. Honey. Extra fat added just because it felt good. People ate slower. Smiled more. Laughed louder. Even bowls sounded happier. Children ran. Dogs barked. Chickens argued loudly. Cows wandered farther. The village started making noise again. And the light. The light stayed. Evening stretched. Shadows softened. Candles were saved. Fires burned lower. Birdsong returned. Bees hummed. Water moved louder. The village felt alive again. Spring did not erase winter. But it whispered softly. You made it. Let's slow down for a moment. Imagine the fire going low. The village quiet. Snow resting on rooftops like a soft blanket. Breath moving slow in dark rooms. No engines. No screens. No glowing clocks watching the minutes. Just people. Just warmth. Just the long night. Medieval villagers did not rush their nights. They couldn't. The dark was deep. The cold was real. There was nowhere to run, and nothing to scroll. So life slowed down. On purpose. And slowly, they mastered it. They mastered slow living before it became a trendy word on the internet. Their evenings were calm. Their meals were warm. Their movements were careful. Their days followed the sun, not the clock. Their nights followed the fire, not a screen. They rested when the dark came. They rose when the light returned. They listened more. They spoke softer. They waited patiently. Winter taught them to be gentle with time. They did not fight the night. They worked with it. When storms came, they stayed in. When wind howled, they leaned closer to the hearth. When cold pressed against walls, they layered clothes, added wood, and whispered prayers. They didn't panic. They adapted. They accepted what they could not change and prepared for what they could. And that takes quiet strength. Patience was their superpower. Waiting for spring. Waiting for daylight. Waiting for snow to melt. Waiting for life to soften again. They didn't call it patience. They just called it winter. Their simplicity was not poor. It was focused. They didn't own much, but everything they owned mattered. A cloak meant warmth. A bowl meant food. A candle meant light. A neighbor meant help. Nothing was extra. And that made life feel clear. Their resilience did not look heroic. It looked ordinary. It looked like someone waking up at 3 in the morning to check the fire. It looked like patching a shirt for the third time. It looked like carrying soup to an old neighbor. It looked like banking embers carefully before sleep. Quiet actions. Big results. And here we are. We live with heaters, thick walls, glowing screens, endless light, and warm water at the turn of a handle. Cold rarely threatens our survival. Darkness rarely frightens us. And yet, we are often restless. We rush. We scroll. We fill every quiet moment with noise. Maybe those long medieval nights still have something to teach us. That slowing down is not weakness. That quiet can be safe. That warmth is a gift. That simple things can carry us through long seasons. Tonight, when you lie down, feel your blankets. Feel the warmth in your room. Feel the quiet. Somewhere in history, people fought very hard so nights like yours could be easy. The fire glows. The house rests. The dark stays outside. The medieval village is asleep. Snow rests on rooftops. Smoke drifts thin and lazy into dark sky. Cats curl tighter. Dogs breathe slow. Somewhere a last ember glows like it is guarding everyone's dreams. And in this quiet, there is something to learn. Medieval villagers did not rush life. They could not. Dark arrived early. Light left fast. Winter made time feel heavy. You could not stretch the day. You could only work with what you were given. So they mastered slow living. Not as a trend. Not as a lifestyle brand. But as survival. They moved slower in winter. They spoke softer. They sat longer by the fire. They listened more. They waited more. They learned to live in pauses. They didn't fill every quiet moment with noise. They didn't fight silence. They let it exist. Silence was not awkward. It was normal. And in that quiet, people rested deeply. Their patience was strong. They waited for daylight. They waited for snow to melt. They waited for storms to pass. They waited for spring. Waiting was not boring. It was hopeful. Every slow morning meant they were still here. Every long night meant they had made it another day. Patience was not weakness. It was how they survived. Their simplicity was powerful. They did not have much, but what they had mattered. A cloak meant warmth. A candle meant light. A bowl meant food. A neighbor meant help. Nothing was extra. Everything had a job. And because life was simple, life was clear. You woke up. You worked. You ate. You rested. No rushing. No clutter. No endless choices. Just rhythm. Their resilience did not look heroic. It looked like quiet strength. It looked like someone waking up in the dark to feed the fire. It looked like patching the same coat again. It looked like carrying soup to a sick neighbor. It looked like sitting through another storm and trusting the roof. Small actions. Big meaning. Now think about tonight. You have walls that keep heat in. You have blankets that are soft and dry. You have light at the push of a finger. You have warm water waiting in pipes. You can sleep without fear of snow in your room. You can wake without ice in your breath. That is a quiet miracle. So take a moment. Feel your blanket. Feel the warmth in your room. Feel the calm in the air. Somewhere deep in history, people worked very hard so nights like this could exist. The fire rests. And you are safe. Good night.